Hello and welcome to my channel, dear viewers. Today, I'll be uncovering two shocking stories that even the most experienced investigators found deeply unsettling. Please support my channel by liking and subscribing, and let's get started. On the afternoon of February 13th, 2007, police officers began to gather in the vicinity of a military base in the city of Goyang, Gyeonggi Province. Shortly thereafter, a forensic team arrived, and upon excavating several patches of earth, they uncovered parts of a dismembered body. Today's case is one of dismemberment. However, this incident stands apart from the usual occurrences of its kind. It is far more brutal than any prior case in the country. At the time of discovery, the body was entirely dismembered, making it impossible to ascertain the original form or any details about the deceased. Once some of the pieces were pieced together, it became possible to identify the skull, sternum, and pelvic bones. After unearthing another pit, additional remains were found. In total, 82 fragments of remains were discovered across this mountainous area. The body had not only been dismembered, but had been reduced to extremely small pieces. Such an extreme case of body dismemberment is rare in the annals of forensic history. The victim, who suffered such brutal treatment, was a woman in her 20s, surnamed Ryu, who had been residing in Daegu at the time of her disappearance. Ryu went missing 3 weeks prior, on January 27th. On that day, she had traveled to Ilsan, Gyeonggi Province, to meet her boyfriend, and after that, she vanished. The last person to see her was her boyfriend, Kim. According to him, they met on January 27th and spent time together, and on the evening of January 28th, around 7 p.m., Ryu said she would take the KTX train back to Daegu. He accompanied her to the entrance of the platform at Seoul Station. That was the last time he saw her. However, her parents noticed she did not return home and filed a missing person report on January 30th. 6 days after her disappearance, on February 2nd, her family received a strange message from her. Ryu's older sister received a text that read something like, "Here the phone is the same. I don't know exactly where I am." It appeared like some sort of encrypted text or error. The police attempted to decode the message as thoroughly as possible and concluded that the likely text was, "Seems like I'm in Chollado, don't know where I am." It seemed there were typing errors, which might indicate she was in a very hurried and dangerous situation. This suggested that her disappearance was unlikely to have been voluntary and was most likely linked to a crime. The police immediately began tracking the location of her phone, and its signal was detected in Gwangju, Jeollado. A special search team was assembled, which commenced active efforts to locate Ryu. However, oddly enough, in the Gwangju area, there was not a single person who had seen Ryu. When the investigation hit a dead end, the police decided to focus on Ryu's circle, especially her boyfriend Kim, who was the last person known to be with her. Kim indeed aroused significant suspicion. However, his statements were very consistent. Moreover, we know Ryu sent that mysterious message. The police also checked Kim's phone location on the day in question and found that he was at home in Ilsan, Gyeonggi Province. Thus, he had a solid alibi, and it seemed impossible for him to have sent the message instead of Ryu. Nevertheless, the police continued to suspect Kim, and they had their reasons. The primary suspicious fact was his credit card activity on the morning of Ryu's disappearance. On that day, Kim used his card to purchase several items: a blender, towels, a bathroom brush, and cleaning supplies. These were all ordinary household items, each with its typical use. However, when considered collectively, they raised suspicion. So a few days later, on February 13th, the police went to Kim's apartment in Ilsan, Gyeonggi Province. If a crime had indeed occurred, Kim's apartment might have been the scene. Therefore, a forensic examination was conducted. However, shortly after the investigation began, something astonishing was discovered. Traces of blood were found in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. A particularly large amount of blood was found on sharp tools, such as a knife and a saw blade. Furthermore, traces of blood were also discovered in the recently purchased blender. As expected, DNA analysis revealed that all the blood belonged to the missing Ryu. Blood on a knife or blade could be explained, for instance, by a hand cut, but traces of blood in a blender raised enormous suspicions. This became almost irrefutable evidence that Kim was somehow connected to Ryu's disappearance. With all this evidence collected, the police began to intensely interrogate Kim. Eventually, a shocking confession came from his lips. He had dismembered his girlfriend Ryu and disposed of the remains by discarding them near a military base. This revelation came on the 19th day after her disappearance. Let's delve a little deeper into the criminal Kim. At that time, he was 32 years old, serving as an active-duty sergeant stationed at an army base in Gyeonggi. In November 2004, he met Ryu through a mutual acquaintance, and they started dating. By the time of the incident, they had been together for 2.5 years. A couple in their 30s was likely serious about their relationship, and 2.5 years is not a short period. During that time, Kim had also become close with his girlfriend's family. No one could have imagined that Kim would end up killing Ryu. However, in reality, Kim's inner world was far more brutal and vile than anyone could have guessed. Only Kim and his girlfriend Ryu knew the true extent of it. Ryu suffered from psoriasis, a chronic skin condition, but Kim often insulted and humiliated her because of it. These insults were not just unpleasant jokes. They were true affronts to her dignity. He would say things like, "Looking at your skin ruins my mood." How could someone speak like that to their girlfriend? It's unclear why he started dating her in the first place if he felt that way about her condition. These humiliations and insults about her skin grew increasingly vicious, and every time they met, it would lead to arguments. Their relationship was already on the brink of collapse. On January 27, 2007, the day of the incident, Ryu went to Seoul without notifying her boyfriend in advance. She wanted to discuss whether she should continue her relationship with this man and even possibly marry him, and she decided to have this conversation face-to-face. When she met Kim, he immediately started yelling at her and swearing. He asked, "Why did you come without warning? And did I really have to meet you at the station? That's so annoying." Everything seemed to irritate him. His actions demonstrated just how much he disregarded Ryu. Despite this, they went to Kim's apartment, and by then, it was already the morning of January 28th. Kim was still in an agitated state and began arguing with Ryu again. It all started with her skin condition. Exhausted and drained, Ryu uttered, "Enough already, a stone thrown in jest can still kill a frog." To which Kim retorted, "What, are you a frog? More like a pig." The argument dragged on, and at 1:47 a.m., Kim mentioned he was hungry and ordered some pork balsam. He offered Ryu to join him, but given the circumstances, having an appetite was out of the question. She declined, and Kim resumed his insults. Ryu then quietly asked, "How many headache pills does it take to die?" Kim sarcastically replied, "No one dies that easily." Ryu pressed further, "Do you want me to die?" Kim responded, "Do whatever you want." Kim claims he initially brushed off her words, but then witnessed Ryu actually taking the pills. According to him, she swallowed 15 headache pills and 50 nicotine gum tablets, a total of 65 tablets. Then, he says, she began to convulse, vomit, and have trouble breathing, eventually ceasing to breathe altogether. Up to this point, this is Kim's account. Since this occurred in an apartment with no witnesses, we can't know for sure what transpired between them, which is the most tragic aspect of this case. Kim insists he never killed Ryu, claiming she took the pills herself and passed away. Yes, that's possible, but now we're dealing with dismemberment. If his girlfriend was truly in critical condition, why didn't he call emergency services at 119? Instead, he chose to dismember the body. When asked why he didn't seek help, Kim answered that he feared being accused of murder. So what happened next? After Ryu passed away, around 5:50 a.m., Kim began dismembering her body with a knife he found at home. By 7:47 a.m., roughly 2 hours later, Kim realized the knife wasn't sufficient. He decided to look up the opening time of the nearest supermarket online. Upon leaving the house, he discarded Ryu's pants and shoes in a recycling bin. He then went to the supermarket and purchased a saw, cleaning supplies, and a blender. Returning home from 10:30 in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening, he was solely engrossed in the gruesome task of dismemberment. Kim methodically began to dismember the body. He placed chunks of flesh into a pot and boiled them, then pulverized them in a blender. The larger bones were cut with a saw. He even snipped off all the hair from the head using kitchen scissors, doused it in alcohol, and set it ablaze to eliminate any DNA evidence. This was meticulously planned. He aimed to eliminate any possibility of leaving a trace. This was once his partner, a woman he was close to, yet he treated her with such brutality. He packed all the body parts into Ziploc bags, and then at 7 o'clock in the evening, he got into his car and drove to Seoul Station. There, he went into the men's restroom on the first floor and flushed some of the remains down the toilet. He then proceeded to a bathhouse and disposed of more remains in the toilet there, but that wasn't enough. Returning home, he continued to break down the body into even smaller pieces and placed the remains into 12 bags. He ventured alone into the mountainous area near a military base and dug several holes. He then distributed the remains, the head, rib cage, and pelvic bones, into different graves. As I describe this, it's difficult to fathom that such a thing is even possible. It's something that evokes horror, and it's hard to believe it actually took place in South Korea, and isn't just part of another episode of Saturday Night Mysteries. This was an unprecedented case of body destruction and disposal. Finally, Kim lied to Ryu's family and the police about her last known activities. Remember the text message that was sent in her name? It was he who sent that very message, attempting to confuse the investigation and convince everyone that she was somewhere in Jeollado. That message, here in Jeollado, was actually written and sent by Kim himself. How did he manage this without arousing suspicion? He left his own phone at home in Ilsan and traveled to Gwangju, Jeollado with Ryu's phone. There he sent the message, deliberately making mistakes so it appeared as though it was sent by someone in a panic and dangerous situation, and then returned home. This created the impression that his phone had been in Ilsan the entire time, thereby reinforcing his alibi. This was indeed a meticulously malicious plan. It's important to note that Kim served in a medical battalion for 12 years, which might have equipped him with certain skills in handling a body that ordinary people lack. Yet despite this, why did he choose such a brutal method to dispose of the body? That remains a mystery. Moreover, Kim persistently claims he did not kill Ryu, asserting she died from an overdose of headache pills. But if he truly didn't kill her, then why dispose of her body in such a gruesome manner? It simply doesn't add up. When the trial began, certain issues arose. Kim admitted to dismembering the body and disposing of the remains, but the degree of dismemberment was so extensive that it was impossible to determine the exact time and cause of Ryu's death. Everything we know about the sequence of events was reconstructed solely based on Kim's testimony, and his statements remained consistent. Yes, I dismembered and disposed of the body, but I did not kill her. He even claimed that he attempted to save her by performing CPR when she lost consciousness. He asserts that when Ryu stopped breathing, he performed artificial respiration, and then, believing she was dead, decided to dismember her body? It just doesn't make sense. Clearly, he was trying to avoid a murder charge. Astonishingly, at the first hearing in the military court, his claims were accepted, and he was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment. This meant he was only charged with negligent homicide, for failing to provide sufficient help to avert death, thereby reducing the degree of his guilt. At this point, the prosecution appealed, and in the appellate court, the verdict was altered. The higher court recognized that Kim had indeed committed premeditated murder, and that dismembering the body into over 80 pieces was a clear attempt to conceal the crime. Furthermore, during additional forensic examinations, traces of blows were found on the victim's skull, and her teeth were broken, indicating violence. Thus, he was found guilty of murder, and the sentence was changed to life imprisonment. Can such a crime result in merely a life sentence? It has been 16 years since Kim Jong-sar's crime. What if, after serving 20 years in prison, he proves to be a model inmate and is granted parole? He could soon be free. We might find ourselves sharing society with such individuals. As is well known, South Korea is effectively a country where the death penalty is not enforced. As of 2023, in the past 5 years, only 4 death sentences have been handed down at the initial hearings, and in none of these cases did the Supreme Court uphold the death sentence. I'm not an unequivocal supporter of the death penalty, but sometimes I wish that criminals like Kim Jong-sar lived in constant fear of death, because it provides a sense of satisfaction. Moreover, I endorse the idea that such brutal criminals should be completely isolated from society. Of course, the death penalty remains a complex issue, but I hope the state makes a wise decision in the direction of genuinely protecting its citizens. Stay with me, the second story is coming up, and it's just as shocking. Let me know in the comments what you think about the first story. Your thoughts always mean a lot to me. On February 21st, 2010, in a small village in the Gunbuk area of Gyeonggi Province, 3 local residents with anxious expressions gathered at a modest mill. This mill belonged to 76-year-old grandmother Park Mandok, who ran it single-handedly. The previous day, Park had not been in contact with her family, prompting her eldest daughter-in-law, concerned by this silence, to ask neighbors to check if everything was all right. "Grandma, are you home?" the residents called out cautiously as they stepped inside. The first thing that caught their eye was something draped with a non-woven fabric. One of the residents lifted it, revealing a gruesome sight: the blood-soaked body of Grandma Park. Her face and head bore the marks of numerous blows from a heavy object, and dark red bloodstains were scattered around. It was a brutal murder in a quiet rural village. Grandma Park led a peaceful life, managing the mill alone since her children lived elsewhere. She was a kind woman, respected by the local community. Could it have been a murder out of revenge? It seemed unlikely. Perhaps it was a robbery gone awry. The mill was situated on the main street and was easily noticeable. Upon entering the yard, one could see a well at its center. One building was used as the mill and the other as living quarters. When the police arrived, they took the body and searched the house but found no valuables missing. This suggested that greed was not the motive behind the crime. However, some strange clues were left at the scene. This was a crime scene where an elderly woman was found unconscious. From the spot where she fell, 9 drops of blood formed a trail leading to the well in the center of the yard. The blood trail ended right at the well. The police immediately peered inside and discovered an iron hammer and 2 cement blocks. It was likely with these tools that the killer had attacked the elderly woman, then hidden them in the well. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA of the perpetrator were found at the crime scene. The police began by questioning the neighbors. Soon, the investigation zeroed in on a suspect, a 33-year-old man named Kim, who lived merely 50 meters from the deceased woman's home. When the police approached his residence, they noticed him burning something in his yard. Moreover, there were signs of recently washed laundry hanging out to dry. These details immediately raised red flags. The officers couldn't help but notice his shoes, which left them stunned. Both sneakers bore stains that resembled blood. They promptly requested Kim to remove his footwear and sent them off for forensic analysis. On the left sneaker, there was a round blood stain, just 4 millimeters in diameter, while the right one showed signs of an attempted cleanup, as if someone had tried to wipe the blood away. The forensic results confirmed their worst fears. The blood belonged to the murdered elderly woman, Mrs. Pak. Convinced of Kim's guilt, the police arrested him on the spot. But who was this man really? Kim turned out to be a drifter without steady employment. After his family left the hometown 4 years ago, he had been living alone. In that time, he had managed to rack up a series of both minor and major offenses. When his background was scrutinized, a staggering 18 prior convictions came to light. In the village, he had long been branded a troublemaker, earning the wary glances of the locals. Yet there was one person who still treated him like family, the elderly Mrs. Pak. She lived nearby and often invited him over for meals, showing him kindness and attention. However, Kim had a severe flaw. He had no control when it came to alcohol. Once he started drinking, he would wreak havoc, causing disturbances throughout the village. Even Mrs. Pak, who had shown him such compassion, couldn't escape his aggression. In drunken fits, Kim would show up at her place demanding money, insisting it was urgently needed. This was not an isolated incident, but a recurring ordeal. Initially, Mrs. Pak would give him money out of pity, but over time, her patience wore thin. She confided in the locals about her concerns and asked them not to give Kim any money if he showed up drunk again. Just a day after this conversation, the elderly woman was found brutally murdered. It was clear that Kim had a motive. The police suspected that he had learned about her complaints to the neighbors and, in a fit of rage, sought revenge. Alternatively, he might have come to her for money again, and when refused, lashed out in anger. Given his criminal past and struggles with alcohol, this seemed highly plausible. But Kim's version of events was quite different. He claimed that when the neighbors discovered Mrs. Pak's body, he was as shocked as everyone else and immediately ran to the scene. This was a story that shook everyone who knew the people involved. The shock was intensified by the fact that someone considered close was at the heart of the events. It all happened before the police arrived, when he, trying to make sense of the situation, insisted that the blood on his sneakers appeared accidentally when he lifted a cloth and a drop fell on his shoe. He also explained that he was burning regular trash in the garden and doing laundry, as he had planned earlier. According to him, it was all just a coincidence. From Kim's perspective, his explanations seemed quite convincing. However, for the police, it wasn't enough. They had to examine the evidence more thoroughly. The key evidence became the bloodstains on his sneakers, which the police decided to analyze using scientific methods. Their task was to uncover the truth by examining the shape of the stains. If events had unfolded as Kim claimed, and the blood had indeed dripped onto the side of the sneaker, the stain would have an elongated oval shape. But if the blood had splattered as a result of a strong blow with a hammer, it would have spread horizontally, leaving round stains. The marks on Kim's left sneaker had precisely this circular shape, casting doubt on his account. Furthermore, there was another crucial detail in the case. Mrs. Pak's body was discovered on February 21st, but the police determined the estimated time of her death to be 10:15 a.m. the previous day, February 20th. This was the last time she was seen alive when she entered her house and did not come out again. However, on that same day, residents noticed Kim loitering near her home. He responded by claiming it was an accident. These inconsistencies and strange coincidences only deepened suspicions, compelling the police to seek more substantial evidence in this tangled tale. During the investigation, it was revealed that in February, when the murder happened, local ponds were nearly devoid of snails, as their season runs only from May to June. This fact cast doubt on one of the explanations regarding Kim's presence near the crime scene. Soon, a new piece of evidence surfaced in the backyard where the well stood, a bloodied cigarette butt. DNA testing revealed that the blood on the butt did not belong to Kim, but to an unexpected suspect, the elder son of Grandma Pak. But why was the elder son's blood on a cigarette butt found at the crime scene? The police began probing the relationship between mother and son. However, the elder son had no motive for murder. Moreover, he had an excellent relationship with his mother, and those around him described him as a son who always cared for her. A crucial point in the investigation was that at the time of the crime, the elder son was in another city. On the purported day of the murder, February 20th, his movements were captured by surveillance cameras both at home and at work. But then why was his blood found at the crime scene? It was a mystery. However, part of this enigma was soon unraveled thanks to the son's testimony. Upon learning of his mother's demise, he rushed to the scene and lit a cigarette. His lips were chapped, leaving droplets of blood on the discarded cigarette. This explained the presence of his blood. Thus, the cigarette butt ceased to be a crucial piece of evidence. When this came to light, suspicion shifted back to the neighbor, Mr. Kim. Kim's attorney vigorously objected, particularly concerning the sneakers with bloodstains, which the police deemed key evidence. The defense argued, if indeed someone delivered multiple blows with a hammer and a brick to the head, how could there be only a few drops of blood on the shoes? After all, there was a significant amount of blood on the body of the late Mrs. Pak, and plenty around it too. It would be logical to assume that the perpetrator's clothing and footwear should be heavily stained with blood, not just have 2 or 3 drops. This was the defense's argument. Soon, a new piece of evidence emerged that brought some clarity to the case. Blood-stained shoes were found tucked away in a corner of the mill, and they belonged to Mrs. Pak. The shoes were drenched in blood. It's worth noting that the heel of the shoe was crushed, which leads to some intriguing thoughts. What if the perpetrator had deliberately crushed the victim's shoes to wear them while committing the crime? Afterward, tidying up the crime scene and covering it with fabric, he switched back to his sneakers, at which point a few drops of blood might have landed on them. Perhaps that's why Mr. Kim, despite washing his clothes and even burning several items, continued to confidently wear his sneakers. Thus, the bloodied shoes of Mrs. Pak could have been a crucial piece of evidence. However, here's an unexpected twist. Ultimately, Mrs. Pak's shoes were not used in court as evidence. The reason being they were discovered too late, after Mr. Kim had already been charged. So all these speculations were made in hindsight. Whose mistake was it? Had the police conducted a more thorough investigation of the crime scene, this might have been avoided. The problem was that they simply assumed the victim's shoes were stained with blood while she wore them, and nothing more. But in reality, many clues were left behind at the crime scene, which the police overlooked. For instance, mysterious footprints and bloodstains on the fridge and walls were found in Mrs. Pak's house. This suggests that the perpetrator might have left traces while inside the home. Yet the police proposed an alternative explanation. They claimed the footprints on the floor were the result of an arrogant individual who carelessly forgot to wipe his shoes, and the blood on the walls and fridge was just another of his blunders. But isn't that rather unprofessional? They simply admitted it. This case was riddled with its own enigma. All the evidence that could have shed light on what happened was not discovered during the initial investigation, but later on, which led to considerable confusion. Due to the fact that the evidence surfaced too late, it became impossible to determine exactly to whom it belonged. As a result, it couldn't be used in court. Despite these challenges, Mr. Kim still found himself on trial for the murder of Grandma Pak. How did it all end? In August 2010, the first hearing took place in Changwon. It was a public trial with a jury. 9 jurors expressed doubt about Mr. Kim's guilt, stating that a single trace of blood on a sneaker wasn't enough to label him a murderer. The court took this into consideration and acquitted Kim. Indeed, there were no eyewitnesses at the crime scene. Aside from the mark on his shoe, there was no other evidence, making it difficult to definitively conclude his guilt. This seemed logical, but the prosecution immediately filed an appeal. The second hearing followed soon after, but just as in the first case, the court found insufficient grounds for conviction, and in October 2011, the Supreme Court ultimately confirmed his innocence. But was he truly innocent? The story didn't end there. During the trial proceedings, Mr. Kim committed another crime. One of the village residents testified in court against him. This incited his anger, and he decided to take revenge, launching a sudden attack on this woman. Consequently, he received less than a year in prison for charges of threats and assault. This was Kim, who, in a fit of rage, attacked someone merely for testifying. But was he really not the killer in the original case? Meanwhile, the villagers feared that once freed, Kim would return and seek revenge. Fearing a potential tragedy, they even installed surveillance cameras at the village entrance. Thus, Kim, the prime suspect in this case, slipped through the fingers of justice, leaving the case tragically unsolved. Perhaps the investigators were too hasty in concluding that Kim was the criminal, which is why they failed to gather enough evidence to expose him. The blood traces on his shoes were already there, bolstering their confidence, which ultimately created a loophole through which the suspect managed to escape. Now you probably have a clearer understanding of why investigators are so relentless in their pursuit of evidence, even when it seems like the perpetrator has been identified. There's a word we use: karma. It's the principle that our actions inevitably come back to us. If someone truly committed such a heinous crime as taking a life, one day they will experience pain and suffering far greater than what they inflicted. Rest in peace.